The one with All the Haste is the 19th episode of the 4th season of Friends. This is directed by Kevin Bright, and as always there will be spoilers now as I talk about things that happen in this episode, and as I usually do, sometimes I'll do things chronologically, but with this one I've grouped them by part of the narrative. We have 3, but one of them is teeny tiny, and this involves Phoebe and her Santa Claus pants, and that's it. That's the extent of that. She comes in wearing maternity pants, and she thinks they are maternity pants, but they're actually Santa Claus pants with a list of good children and bad children in them. That's slightly creepy to have a list of naughty children in the pocket, but other than that, it's quite delightful, and I rather like that. I think it's also nice that we're taking a slight break from Phoebe and the pregnancy, because we have had quite a bit of focus on that, and obviously there is more focus to come when we have the birth of the babies and things. So it's nice to have a little break, but also nice to just have a little bit of Phoebe in there with a pretty great costume. We then have part of the episode focusing on Ross and Emily. And I don't remember how I first felt about this. I don't remember first watching this episode because I've seen it many, many times. So I don't remember my initial response, but I feel like it's unpredictable. In fact, I feel like the part with Monica, Rachel, Chandler and Joey was also really unpredictable, but I'll get into that when we get there. The point there is that I think it's an unpredictable episode, but I can't quite remember how I initially felt about it. Emily is getting ready to leave to go back to London, and Ross tells her to just stay another day. Clearly, he doesn't know how expensive flights are, or indeed how expensive it is to change your flight. And he's got an earring. She convinced him to get an earring, which is fine. I don't have any opinions on that. And when he's talking to Chandler and Joey, he kind of suggests that he should ask her to move in with him. And the guys point out they've been together 6 weeks. Not only is that not a long time to ask somebody to move in with you, but that's not a long time to ask somebody to move to a different country to live with you. And he comes to a sensible realization that it could scare her, it could be too much too soon, he's not going to ask her, but he's unable to contain himself, and he just kind of blurts it out when he's with her again. And Emily is obviously shocked. And Emily says it would be different if it was years later and they were getting married. And Ross realises that that's what he wants to happen. And he proposes to her. And I don't know if Ross or Emily is the least sensible here. Ross for putting Emily in that position, because she would probably feel terrible if she rejected his proposal. So maybe she feels a little bit of pressure to just jump in and say yes. But at the same time, I feel like she should have been a bit more sensible and stuck to her beliefs that it would be too much too soon. So I feel like neither of them is thinking with a clear head. But Ross did make a good point. He said that he'd been with Carol for 4 years before they got married, and obviously that ended badly for Ross. So waiting longer doesn't necessarily determine the positive outcome. And Ross says something that I think was really great, and he says, "This makes sense for us." And I like the fact that even though I don't agree with either of their decisions, I do like the fact that he's saying marriage is not a one-size-fits-all thing. Some people get married sooner, some people get married later. It's different for everybody. And I kind of like that they were highlighting that fact, even though, again, I don't necessarily agree with it. And they then tell everybody else. And I think everybody's responses were pretty perfect and very realistic, because initially they're all understandably very shocked by this, but after getting over that initial shock, they do congratulate them. And I think that was the right approach, because even if they think it's too much too soon, there is absolutely no point in saying to somebody who's just announced their engagement, "What are you doing? It's too soon." So I think it was a very sensible response. We do have a kind of heartbreaking moment where Rachel has been in the bedroom and she comes out when she hears the news, and she's standing in the doorway, and we can see her just behind them with I think quite a puzzling expression. I think mostly it's confusion, concern, a little bit of heartache. And I think it would be difficult to know what she's feeling in that situation. And I think she might not know how she feels about this. And I think that that's really telling, that she's not really over Ross. Is Ross over Rachel? Well, I'd argue no, but he's so swept up in this moment with Emily that that's not something at the forefront of his mind. So quite a moving way to end that part of the story, I think. We then come to a fabulous part of the episode, and I really love this. I think it's so unpredictable, but I also think it's exactly the way they should have taken this story. It actually starts off at the very beginning with the singing guy singing Mornings Here, the Mornings Here. This is Michael Connor, who has a beautiful voice, and Rachel does not agree with that. At least not that time in the morning. She storms out of the bedroom and starts to rant, and Monica tells her, quite rightly, that she's done her best to make it a nice apartment, but then she ultimately declares this place is a hole, which I don't agree with. I think it's a nice space. It's a large apartment. And granted, the other apartment is nicer, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a hole. But nevertheless, they are entitled to those opinions, and they have a plan. And they decide to offer Chandler and Joey Nick's tickets in exchange for the apartment. Chandler says no, Joey wants to say yes. And they go back and forth a little bit, and ultimately Joey uses the best friend card, which Chandler says he can't use for another year, and they decide to proceed with a challenge, a bet. And they decide initially to let Phoebe control this, and she asks them their favourite things about trees, which is very Phoebe. And then they decide to play cards, and I think this was the first time I learned, I'm not that big into card games, but I think this was the first time I learned that ace can potentially be higher than king, which just makes no sense to me, because if ace is higher than king, that means there's no 1. There's nothing below 2, and that just feels wrong to me. But obviously, I know in a lot of card games, ace is higher, but this was definitely baffling to me back in the day. And I feel like it was fate that Chandler and Joey were meant to have the apartment, because they won the apartment game, and then they pulled the ace, and they declared that ace was higher. I don't agree, but they could have won on that basis, and then they got the king. And it seems like they were just meant to have that apartment. And they got the Knicks tickets, so they're very happy. Monica and Rachel are not happy. The next thing we know, Chandler and Joey are coming back from the Knicks game, and they have t-shirts that they're going to give to the girls, so they go into the left-hand side apartment, apartment 19, and Chandler immediately notices, Joey doesn't, but they've switched apartments. And the comedy here, the timing is perfect, because Joey goes to sit down in the Barca Lounger, and it takes him until his butt touches the seat to then spring up and realise what's going on. And of course they go straight over to the girls' apartment, apartment 20, and demand an explanation. And it turns out they switched the apartments when the guys were out, and I can understand why they'd be annoyed by this. I would be annoyed by that. But also, how quickly did they manage to move all of the furniture, all of their possessions? How long is a Knicks game? Very impressive. And then Monica and Rachel have an offer for them. They will make out for 1 minute. And the next thing we know, they do, and the guys are happy with their apartment again, and everything is perfectly fine. And then we end the episode, the very last scene, with the most adorable moment, where the singing guy is singing Mornings Here again, and Joey sticks his head out of the window, and then his parting okay at the very end was just so cute. So a really nice way to end things. Definitely a very unpredictable episode. I think the progression of the apartments, very unpredictable. The relationship with Ross and Emily, I think, was unpredictable at this stage as well. And I can't remember what I first thought about this episode when I first saw it, but my instinct there is that it would be reasonable for nobody to predict those things going in that direction. And I rather enjoyed it. The one with All the Haste is definitely a pretty solid episode with some really great moments.